Let me know when you're all good, guys. You're good? Joni Mitchell, hello.
Hi.
What a pleasure it is to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us into your home.
Oh, you're welcome.
This place is quite remarkable. It feels like a sanctuary.
Yeah.
Is that what it represents to you?
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
There's artwork on all the walls. Most of it your artwork.
Well, the only thing that isn't is this little painting over here, which is a fairly unknown English artist, but it's very minimal. That's what I bought it on Madison Avenue. It's at that moment in the dawn when water and sky are the same kind of color, right? And the light is coming up. You know, and if you look at it closely, everything else is mine.
In terms of the paintings that are yours, all of them, except for that one, how do you decide what makes the cut? What makes it onto the walls and what doesn't?
Oh, it's changing all the time, and they're moving around. Most of the things here, well, I only paint things that mean something. That's Saskatchewan at 40 below. This is Ochuna, Nigerian water goddess. You know, I'm a water junkie. She's the Nigerian goddess of water, and she came up like Jesus in a tortilla. That came up, and I just hard-edged it and brought her out and found out afterwards who she was. So it's kind of like a Jew seeing the Madonna, you know? I don't belong to this religion, but, you know.
And there's self-portraits around as well?
There's some self-portraits around. That's British Columbia. That's where I'm building my house in British Columbia. That's my property. That's my property in British Columbia, and that one too. That's Edmonton on the banks of the North Saskatchewan. That's in my kitchen.
It's a lot of Canadiana in this room.
Oh yeah, there's my Canadiana brother, son-in-law, and my grandson looking bored up there. This is Mingus and his son Eugene. Mingus dying in Mexico. That's Whittier right now in June. All of the jacaranda are in bloom, that beautiful purple. This one over here. So that's from the LA painting. The two hands with the golden eggs, that's symbolic of a double album. They toss around your latest golden egg. Speculation, who's to know if the next one in the nest will glitter for themselves.
Well, I actually wanted to start with the painting, and I'm glad we're on it and segue into asking you about it, because whenever I've seen you talk about painting or read what you said, it's quite enchanting. Mm-hmm. Does all of your creativity, whether it be painting, writing songs, poetry, come from the same well? In other words, is it the same place in Joni Mitchell where the visual art comes from, or the music?
Yeah, I do believe there are different languages, you know, and some things don't translate as well from one language to another. So you do, you know, you'd create, you know, like I've got vignettes and things that happened that would make a good short film, but wouldn't make a good song, right? You know, so somewhere down the line maybe...
So is it about assigning the idea or the inspiration?
Yeah,
This is...
Yeah, kind of. Well, the painting's pretty straightforward. You know, they're all personal moments, like, you know, I like their memories on the wall, and there's a lot of where I come from in here, or you know, land that I love. The landscapes are all very personal landscapes. Either they're from property that I own or a good hike near the house.
But if
they're my pets, they're birds that came to me to die.
If painting and music are the two languages, or a couple of different languages, how do you describe the languages? How do you know what does music represent in terms of language to you, and what does painting represent?
Well, I'm a painter first, and I kind of apply painting principles to music. I mean, I think my production skills are visual and not from the staff. I don't think in terms of the, as Princess Margaret called it, the fly shit.
Is that what she called it?
That's what she... Do you read? I said, no. Oh, well, it's just fly shit anyway, isn't it? You know? So you don't need to read in the studio because you can go direct to tape. You know, and I play with literate musicians who can transcribe my changes to play to them, and they're surprisingly unorthodox. They'll go to write it out, and it looks like it's an augmented, diminished, you know, inverted, and they're very long, a lot of them. They go, oh, this is deceptive, you know, until they diagnose it to play to it, and then it ends up being So it's a good thing I don't know about that. I just tune
So
to the
painting is
chord.
your first language,
Painting is my first
your mother
language.
tongue.
My mother tongue. So let's say, yeah.
And music is a learned language. And interestingly, I know you did say this in the documentary Women of Heart and Mind. You said, anytime I make a record, it's followed by a painting period. It's a good crop rotation, painting to clear the head. And extracting from that, it feels like you're saying, to a certain extent, correct me if I'm wrong, music is a vocation, painting is liberation.
No, I wouldn't exactly say that. I would say, you do the music, which is very soothing in my, it. I'm choosing chords. Okay, let's start with the poetry. Okay, let's say, which came first, the lyric or the music? Usually the music comes first, okay? And then, I mantra it, I play it over and over, and in that kind of trance, like, a lot of it's kind of soothing, even if it's rhythmic, it's never, I write some party songs, but mostly I write late at night and for myself, and so it can be grooving, but, and I'm listening to those chords and I go, okay, this is here's where the pinnacle thought has to go, here's where the high note goes, and this is where the main thrust, the most important idea has to go, because this is the pinnacle in the music. So then I'll get the melody, then I'll go over it like the Beatles, like scrambled eggs, maybe get something phonetic, and then something happens in the course of a day. Maybe it all comes in one day, or maybe it's later that week, or in some cases it's taken as long as 7 years to get the libretto, to what is this music craving as a story, and then I try, it's a point of craft with me, to marry so that it's theatrical. First of all, they're dramatic pieces. It's frustrated filmmaking. It's very visual, and you're scoring the actress, but the actress, is singing, the lines, but trying to get them as conversational as film, so that you don't really, so that everything is so united and conspiring towards the text.
Hang on, I want to come back to that because that's really interesting. But on the point of painting to clear the head, it sounds, saying that feels like painting is your comfort food.
No, they're all different. They're all different mental processes. So poetry, what you're doing is you're stirring up thoughts, right? Even with a stimulant of some kind, so that you're watching the thought process, which is anti-Buddhism, instead of going thought, dismissing, which is meditative.
Right.
Trying to empty thoughts, out. Italian hands.
You're getting excited. It's okay. I like it. Yeah.
I don't know how the Italian got into the gene pool.
Good.
But anyway, with the poetry, you're making the head jump and you're rating it for linguistics. Like I've got Irish blood, so I go, the Blarney's running. Like all of a sudden, linguistically, there's a lot of alliteration in my thought patterns. You sit down, it's a good time to address a melody that you're working on or something, because it's like the Grunion are running, the Blarney's running, but it's a jumpy head, and you're going good, better, best, you're evaluating, right? With painting, the head process is completely different.
Remove the thoughts?
It's like meditation. You come down to synapses, red in the upper left-hand corner, so it's
what was that? What's going on? What was that?
It's just the ohm, it's just the universe, the hum of the wires or whatever. It just comes down to synapses, non-verbal. The discourse has been silenced.
Right.
So it's a very different head space from poetry.
Is poetry more, and therefore lyrics and music more cerebral?
Well, what would you say?
Well,
you got a busy head.
I guess so. I would say that's what. Yeah.
You're watching it you're watching your busy head, right, from a detached point of view, and you're stealing from it. Ooh, good thought, bad thought. Oh, colorful, not quite to the point. Like it would peel some more layers off the end. That's the way I write. That's not the way everybody writes, but but it's an active brain, and the analytical process is in play. In the painting, the analytical process appears from time to time as a command. Red in the upper left-hand corner, no, it's too fat, like whatever,
Noah's too fat.
nose too
Oh,
fat,
Noah's too fat.
upper lip too thin, like, so it's more
Noah
like
sounds like the robot from Star Trek.
It's more like a contemplate or a meditative. It's more like a Zen mind painting, whereas writing is more from a Buddhist position, more neurotic. You're raiding Mishigas basically. You're the chaos of the contemplative eye thing dishes up.
Let me come back to all that because there's some things I want to touch on there, and especially the writing, the actress roles that you just talked about. But one of the precipitants for this interview is you're going to be back in Canada soon for a tribute concert called Joni, A Portrait in Song at the Luminato Festival. I was at your induction into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2007. You get a lot of these tributes and this kind of acclaim at this point. How comfortable are you being venerated?
Depends on the venerator. I mean, in a certain way, honor died in World War II. It just kind of died, and not very many people know how to do it anymore. If they honor you wrong, it makes you arrogant because it's dumb. If they honor you right, it's humbling, because it's inspiring, right? So sometimes it's inspiring. The more experience I have, the more amused I can be by it and less bugged. I just come to expect that people really don't know how to honor.
But the other part of the veneration is it's predicated upon looking back on your career, your legacy, your work, your life, your art. Do you enjoy looking back?
No, I don't like to look back. I have
at
to,
all.
No, I mean I've come through the worst part. I'm doing a ballet on love, so I didn't want to go back and listen to everything. So I just kind of pulled things out of my head, and because I'd like to redo the bass track on that, or why did I put that reed on that word?
You can't go back and you don't go and listen to Court and Spark or Clouds or something.
Sometimes I'll walk in, somebody will play it, and you walk in, or I have one friend who comes over here and insists on putting my music on, so it's like.
And what happened? What do you do?
He's into it. Oh, we play pool, and I'd rather have Duke Ellington on, frankly, to play pool. But
so you hear the things you would do differently?
Yeah.
You can't give yourself a break and go,
No.
I was in my 20s or 30s or whatever when that happened?
Neither could Picasso. They arrested this old man for defacing a Picasso in the Louvre. I'm sorry to put myself in such lofty company, but, and they dragged him into the office and it was Picasso. I mean, maybe it's a Scorpio trait, but he's going, no, it just isn't right. And he went home and he got his paints and he's working on it. It's hanging in the Louvre, So, I mean, he should have been able to let it go, but he couldn't.
Do you
or Renoir? I saw him being interviewed. Not the painter, but the filmmaker.
But can I make us? It's interesting to me that you don't go back and listen to the music
Unless I have to.
unless you have to. But you've got paintings up all over the place.
Yeah, but there are things I like to look at.
So you like the painting, and you don't look at the painting of Saskatchewan up there and go, I would have done this differently. I would have done that differently. And yet you do with your music.
Paintings are square things to hang on the wall to decorate your house.
But music is
Music
beautiful
is,
to have
Mozart
playing in
is
your home.
wallpaper for princes, and sometimes you want wallpaper for princes in your house, you know what I mean? But, you don't want Yoko Ono gagging and, you don't want that. Not in this house,
Or maybe you like your
can
paintings
say,
more than you
it's
like
really
your music.
artsy and it's interesting, but I don't want that in my house.
But maybe you like your paintings more than you do your music?
Well, if I look, there are some paintings here that, most of these are quite satisfactory. I don't want to put another stroke on them. I guess maybe in answer to your first question, how do I select them? I put up things that seem finished. So I don't have that thing. But if I'm listening to my music and, there's things in there that, geez, I should have put a guitar fill there. Why didn't I do that? Why did I do that? Why did I read that line like that? Why am I whining? I mean, as an actress, I'm performing this song. Yes, it's a sad song, but I would do it differently now,
So even the stuff that people think is classic.
Yeah.
The most influential music that you've written, you'll listen to and find issues with.
Yeah, I was going to say Renoir, you know, the filmmaker. There was a film that he did about the bourgeois that was very controversial, and they were very offended and walked out. If you saw it, you wouldn't understand why. I guess you had to be there at that time. They thought that he was making fools of them, and he did show them as kind of like rich, silly children, you know, unconcerned about the world, but not too, very subtly, right? And who was it? Bogdanovich was interviewing him, and he was in love with the film. He was going, "Oh, you must be so proud of this film," and you know, and he's going, "Well, I didn't like the editing." You know,
Right.
so I guess it's like divine dissatisfaction or something, you know, and it's what drives you to your next period. You won't make that mistake again.
Is there also, on the question of the tributes and the veneration again, is there something about it that you don't like in terms of continuing to be a vital artist that you are? I had the chance to interview.
No, it's just people don't know what honor is. It's just silly.
But, well, I was going to say, Mel Brooks, I had the opportunity to talk to him a few weeks ago about this PBS documentary about his life and work. Quite a fantastic documentary. And he said, I loved it, but it was a little like attending my own wake.
Yeah, well, that's because that's
Does that resonate?
Well, that's a different crowd, and that's the roast crowd. So they just come, they're insulting, you know, like, and John Guerin, who was a man that I lived with and loved, you know, I went to a wake for him. Everybody stood up there, and the things that they said, if John was looking down, yeah, I mean, everything was so incredibly inappropriate. And I said and John was a philanderer. It was hard to live with for that reason, but he loved women. He was a lover of women. He had a wonderful mother and a wonderful grandmother, and they, you know, they were wonderful women. And he loved all the women that he ever loved. And there's something, if you're not trying to be the one, you know, that's kind of noble about that. So at the wake, I was allowed in. The girl after me was not allowed in. She was on the outside. The girl after that, Pixie, he married. She was allowed in. Then the wife, when he died, was 4 before me. So there were some that were not allowed into the wake for various reasons. And I said to Pixie, 2 after me, "Pixie, you know, this is really weird. I mean, people are saying really selfish things. Everybody gets up and they go for themselves, which is, they don't know how to honor. So, you know, why don't we just grab all John's girls and do a can-can across the stage? Let's just do something for John, you know? Like, hey, John, here we are, all your girls."
I think at the songwriters thing, I think people genuinely revere you as a songwriter. I think that was coming from a real place.
What was that?
The Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah.
So that falls in the category of good veneration.
Oh, that was good. You know, like, no, that was a sweet night.
Yeah.
And I had old friends in the house there too, which was an honor. I like the idea that I have friends from the 4th grade still.
Part of the reason people love doing these tributes for you is because they want to feel.
Yeah, I don't want to make them inhibited now,
No,
like I'm ungrateful.
Let's keep
I'm
the tribute.
not ungrateful.
But people want to feel a sense of connection to you, and we don't see you a lot necessarily. I mean, I'm grateful you're doing this interview. You don't do a lot of interviews. You don't make a lot of public appearances. You've been called a recluse. Now,
That's
sitting
because
here
I've
talking.
been ill. I've been ill. What are you supposed to do? Wander around when you're sick as a dog? You can't. You know. So once again, you know, fame is a series of misunderstandings surrounding a name.
You were called a recluse before you were
I've
ill
been
as
sick
well.
all my life. You know, so if I crawl off for a year with abscessed ovaries, I don't make a big publicity of it like Liz Taylor. I don't play the professional sick person, you know. So.
Starting with polio when you were a kid.
Right. And polio relapse in my 40s. And no, I've had health problems.
Does it bother you when people consider you a recluse?
No. People always get everything wrong. When somebody gets something right, I'm always delighted, you know.
One of the funny things about this house I learned, I didn't know this until I got here, you have just one phone in the house, no answering machine, no email, no internet.
No, I got more than one phone.
You got more than one phone.
Yeah, but the other one's shut off.
But you don't have internet, right?
I just got a computer because I'm trying to write my memoirs on the Dragon setup, so I'm trying to learn that one function.
Tell me why you wouldn't want the email and the internet and stuff. Is there a reason for that?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of reasons for it.
Tell me.
Well, first of all, it's a trap. It's Big Brother waiting to spring. for one thing. So there is an element of folly.
You mean affecting privacy? Or what do you mean big brother?
That, and also at a time when we should be cutting back on electricity, we're sucking more and more. Not to mention, me in a delicate position, ease is a fortified, ease, the opposite of dis-ease, is created in the holy spots. If people were sensitive, but sensitivity is not a virtue in the West. As a matter of fact, it's to be taken advantage of. It's misunderstood and devalued. Clarity, its opposite is, look at our laws. Intellect and clarity count. They're revered. Those are the masculine traits. Sensitivity and emotionality are second-class citizens. They're considered the irrational. They're equal and important. And one of the reasons that, we've destroyed we've pissed where we eat, on this planet, is because because especially the Western mind is completely out of balance and has been for centuries.
And so the internet.
So our laws
will
and everything. No, if they were sensitive, they would know that our ionization is just nuts. I mean, the oceans, whales are getting the bends because of sonar and all the activity down there. Whales know how to surface without destroying their bones, but because of the electrical activity, of our stupid inventions down there, when you see 56 whales beaching themselves, that's electronic noise. Well, we are being driven mad by cell phones and satellites and everything, and we don't even take that into consideration. So it's like DDT, it's an evil thing, really, in the big picture. I know that there's all kind of art, there's wonderful things that it can do.
Exploring creativity, exploring musicians from around the world.
You don't need it, for that, and you've got a attention deficit push button people. No, there's more malformation taking place. Even down to bookkeeping, white collar crime potential. It's really just a further extension of our insanity as a species, And at the point of logarithmically no return, which was about 1969, we needed to really go back and use less electricity. But we insist on making push button everything, push button, push button. You got a push button generation. You try to get a thermostat, all you need is to turn it up 1 degree and down 1 degree. 2 movements, bing, bing. You got, are you sure? Are you really sure? You have to push the button about 6 times because, it's a tragic little culture. If they love it, but in the big picture, in the future, it's going to cost dearly. There's terrible consequences for it.
Take me back to growing up in rural Saskatchewan and Saskatoon in the 40s and 50s. I'm curious when you knew that being a creative person, an artist, would be your calling.
2nd grade. Yeah. 2nd grade, I forged my identity as an artist. We had it was the boomers. There was this big population of children. And my house sat between Alexander School and King Street School. I started at Alexander and later went to King Street. But temporarily they opened an Anglican parish hall and took a spill over there. And they brought a little old lady out of retirement. In the second, and she was a nice little old lady, but real reading, writing, arithmetic kind of, very classic, in-the-box kind of thinker. So she graded us in the 2nd grade in all grades and gave us an average. And she moved the A students into a row and called them bluebirds. And she moved the B students into a row and she called them robins. The C students into a row and she called them wrens. And the flunkies she put in a row and called them crows, right? So I looked at the A students and they all had their hands clasped on their desks, as I recall. And they were all looking very accomplished and very proud. And in my opinion, there wasn't a smart person in that row. The smart ones were all in the C row. The Bs were trying to be an A. They were trying to be inside the box,
right.
And the flunkies generally were a bit impaired. And the C was average, but the really smart ones were in the C. Winston Churchill was in the C row. Einstein was in the C row. Most individuated theory would be in the C row, So I remember saying, okay, that prize does not appeal to me. I don't want to be a robin, but I don't like the idea of being a third-class citizen, but I drew the best doghouse. We had to draw a doghouse. It had the front and one side showing, and everybody's were too tall and skinny, or their lines went off at the corners, or they didn't have any sense of proportion. So
You got a sense that was you had
right.
something that others didn't
So
have.
I drew the best doghouse. So from then on, I forged my identity as an artist.
So in grade 2 then, I mean, I know you draw the best doghouse, but do you actually internalize that this is something that you want to be doing for the rest of
Not
your
really.
life?
I just drew my self-worth that I was above average at something. I wasn't just average. I drew the best doghouse. So it was a matter, of self-confidence. Well, I'm good at something, I'm just average at all of this stuff. But those people are not imaginative over there, those 8 people. And I did have this thought, all they did was she said it and they said it back. From here on in, unless she asks something that nobody knows the answer to, I'm not even going to try. And I didn't. I spaced out all the way through the school system. I drew clothes, I wrote poems, I drew pictures of beatniks and hoods and funny sayings, And thank God, because most of what they taught was wrong anyway. I flunked physics. If they taught quantum physics, I would have been intrigued. Light is intermittent matter. Let's talk about it. Where is it if it's solid and it goes away and then it's solid again? Where does it go? That's some interesting stuff.
Were you popular as a kid, as a teenager, when you're doing this drawing and not applying yourself in the academic realm?
To hear people talk, as a young child in North Battleford, the girls were hard to play with because they were so envious and competitive. And
envious because you're good looking?
I'm imaginary play. I'm at the top of this lawn, this wall. I am descending a diamond-studded staircase in a gold lame butterfly pleated dress. At the bottom stands a girl who stamps her foot and says, "No, you're not, I am." Right? So even imaginary stuff. So the girls were hard to play with. What passed for friendship among them, for the most part, was conspiracy. They liked to gang up on other girls, arbitrarily almost. And when you wouldn't, then they'd gang up on you, right? So you just tough that out, because that's just, And the boys, I played with the boys a lot because I had a cap pistol. So, they would say, "Get your gun, Joan. We're playing war. You can be the German." And then they'd shoot me. And I go, "Well, when can I get up?" "Well, you can't get up. You're a dead German." So I get bored and I wander off after a while.
Right.
Or they'd pick Roy Rogers.
fun.
This is a really a crucial life story. They would pick Roy Rogers, and whoever they picked would do exactly the same thing. They'd slap, the posse, we'd slap our asses up and down the back alley, and he would holler to us all, "Come on, men, over the rise. Come on, men." Roy Rogers, whoever he was, "Come on, men, over the rise." Well, 1 mile away from this back alley with laundry on Mondays and garbage burning on Saturdays was a ravine with a bridge. You could roll down, you could sabotage, it was really better. So, I was into location for play. Oh, come on, if we just go 1 mile over here, there's a great place to do cowboys, Let me be Roy. You can't, you're a girl. So I said to my mother one Christmas, "I want a Roy Rogers outfit." Oh, she was all upset. The girl wants a Roy Rogers outfit. So my father said it would be okay. They get me this thing. And the first spring day that I could take my coat off, I come out, there's a picture of me in it. And I'm trying to look really tough. And it was red. I had a red hat and I had these brown Oxfords on because I'd had polio and I had to wear these stupid, ugly shoes. No cowboy boots, but they're crossed at the ankle. I'm looking like really leaning on the old corral, And the red shirt with the fringes and the Roy Rogers written. So I come out and I say, they pick a Roy, and I go, "No, I'm Roy Rogers. Look, it says right here." "That doesn't mean you're Roy Rogers." "Why not? It says right here, right here." "That means you're Dale Evans." "Why?" "You're wearing Roy's clothes." "Well, what does she do?" "Well, she stays home and cooks." "Come on, man, over the rise." So,
Did you want to be a boy?
no, I just wanted to play, no, it wasn't. But I wanted brothers, and I liked the idea of being included. I've always enjoyed men's company, but I found them a little unimaginative. I finally did find friends to play with who grew up to be gay, and they didn't role play. They let me dream big. We put on circuses. They were theatrical. We put on circuses, and I ran the gyp joint, and I was the lion tamer. I get all of the cats, and I made the posters. And they were creative, and they dreamed big.
Is that in Saskatoon?
Yeah. But they were baby classical musicians. One grew up to be an opera singer in Italy someplace, and the other one grew up to be a choir director in its church in Montreal.
So fast forward a little bit. The through line is you're drawing. You're a visual artist. You go from Saskatoon, you attend art school in Calgary for visual arts, right? Mm-hmm. For painting. You were painting. Right. You start also playing in some cafes in Saskatoon musically, then you end up in Toronto. How did music become the career?
Because I got pregnant. I was the only virgin in art school, right? You've been holding on to this precious thing, and I just kind of stupidly let it go.
One weekend in Toronto.
As Jean, my choreographer, says, you were bamfed. No, it was in Banff.
I was in Banff.
Right, you were bamfed, and so I got caught out immediately, and so I had to create a smokescreen. The music was not of interest. This is a trick that fate, because I didn't know I had the gift. I hadn't started to write. I was just a folk singer.
And how did music become the smokescreen rather than painting?
Well, because I'm going to quit art school. The pretense to protect my parents was that, I was having trouble with the profs, and I was in debate with them all the time. They didn't like the way I dressed. Again, you had to go into a box. To be a painter, you had to wear there was a uniform. It didn't allow for individuality. And they were prejudiced against people with hand-to-eye coordination. They were all abstractionists, and I didn't care for that pocket of painting.
Even in art school, there were too many rules for you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was total conformity. And I was an honor student there, and I've talked to other students later that they, even though they were hard on me and always on me, that they used my work as examples. Well, I guess because I became famous that they used it. But I was an honor student, but I was docked because I'm no good at mornings, and I would go to Edmonton and sing on the weekends, come home tired and miss Monday morning. So tardiness, which should not have come into play for an artist, a real artist anyway, was the reason that they were going to dock me, was for absenteeism. I said, well, why? I got my work in, I just didn't get it in by the clock exactly,
So music becomes the smokescreen.
Mm-hmm.
You go to Toronto, and by the way, of course, you have the child, you put the child up for adoption, you find your daughter many years later, and we've heard some of that
But let's clear up something that people
Please.
assume erroneously, and I see it written again and again and again, that that I gave up my daughter to further my career. This is so wrong. There was no career. My music at that point, first of all, I was just a folk singer. It was just, there was no ambition. There was no, I had a nice voice, I guess. I played okay, but there was no real gift that, it was just something that was happening and was going to die out soon. It was a way to get money to smoke, and to have a pizza and go to a movie and to bowl, because that's what I did at art school too. I came in there with no frills. I had to earn half my fare at art school because my parents disapproved, and there was nothing left over. So singing in the clubs was fun, and it afforded me a little bit of income that I wouldn't have had.
Joni, when did you know it was more than fun? That you actually did. You were more
when
than
I made
just
a bad
folk singer.
marriage. When I married Chuck Mitchell, I should have been a runaway bride on our wedding day. Even his mother said, of him, that he was referred to him as the first waffle, and said it should be used to warm up the pan and then thrown out. He behaved so selfishly on his wedding day. If I'd known about runaway brides, I would have, so it didn't last very long. And like they say, if you make a good marriage, God bless you. If you make a bad marriage, become a philosopher. So, Both Sides Now and all of those songs that came out of that were, to get away from him, I would go down to the Toddle House. We lived in the black neighborhood there, and I would sit there and drink coffee and write. And so the writing began to happen. he tried to gain ownership of it. He set up a publishing company. I had him set up two because I knew I had to get out of that marriage, you know. But the thing that keeps getting written is that I gave up my daughter in order to further my career. This is just not so. What was done at that time was you didn't even see the daughter. You didn't have the right thing to do to protect your parents was to get out of town, go into a home. Well, in 65, the homes were full. So many girls got cut out because everything was changing. Yeah. Movies were getting sexier. It was very confusing to be a young woman there. What's right? You know, everything was changing. And the pill was not available. So there were a lot of unwed children born in 1965, more than could be adopted, and all the homes were full, you know. So it was very difficult to survive. I mean, at the time I had her, I was destitute, you know, and if there was no way I could take her out of the hospital into a blizzard with no job, no roof over my head. There was no way I could take her. And there weren't even foster homes available at that time because there was such a glut of unwed children. But she was beautiful, and she found her way into a foster home. And I tried to get work and get a setup that I could bring her to. Well, in that time period, I couldn't get any work in Toronto because I couldn't get $160 to get into the union. You know, I was beset by predators, you know, like people trying to take advantage of the situation. I won't name names, but a lot of human ugliness came at me because I was in a white slavers. I mean, you wouldn't believe the gauntlet you have to run when you're young, destitute, and in a situation like that. They tortured me in Toronto General. They literally tortured me, you know, in there, you know, out of disrespect. You know, 30 years later, when my granddaughter was born in the same hospital, it wasn't the same hospital, but it was the dark ages then for women. You know, I was a criminal. I was a fallen woman. It was, you know, it was a very difficult situation. So things changed, things improved. The Christians would have us go backwards, you know, in their lack of compassion, in their ignorance, and in their desire to increase the folds, like the Catholics kept the birth control thing going. It's kind of the same roots. It all comes down to money, not compassion, really, you know, the driving wheel behind it. So, you know, am I getting too heavy?
No, I'm glad you cleared that up. I'm glad you cleared that up. But I do want to ask you, but
I did not give, I had no career. They don't understand. At the time I gave her up, I had no career.
So when does the career?
And I had no ambition to be a musician because there was no reason. I mean, the bottom was falling out of folk music. My only thing was, this is the last time I'm ever going to be able, with a grade 12 education, get enough money in the bank, you know, make hay while the sun shines. You know, take a lot of gigs. I booked myself about...
So what becomes the turning point where this becomes not just a career, but a massively successful one? When did music actually become something more than the diversion? When did it become... When did you realize, hey man, I'm good, and people are
I remember
flocking to my show?
Trying to get work in New York and saying to a club owner who wouldn't hire me, I was working all the way up the coast, and bursting into tears and going, but I'm good, you know. So I mean, under duress, I knew, I guess, to a degree, I knew it was good enough that he didn't have to, you know, that I would like to have worked in New York. New York's a hard town to crack, and once you crack it, they're very loyal, and they're very loyal to me to this day. But initially, you know, until you had a record deal, it was hard to get, and you couldn't get a record deal until you had, it was catch-22 kind of. But what was your question again?
My question was, when you really, can you pinpoint a time, whether it was writing a song or playing a gig or something, when you realized that this was going to be a career for you? This had real potential.
No, there wasn't. You know, as David said, Joan, you're the only person I know, you know, who doesn't want to be famous. I really didn't. I wrote a poem about
Which David Crosby?
Geffen. You know, I thought fame was going to be a horrible experience, which until you get used to it, it is. You know, you just have to deal with an incredible amount of stupidity because this place is mentally ill with celebrities. So you have to see a lot of mental illness, you know, coming at you. You know, like, and you go, oh my God, this culture is so sick. I'll tell you what, at 16, this will give you an idea. I'm not a kid that played air guitar in the bedroom and go, oh, I'm going to be rich and famous and all of that.
Right.
I felt sorry for stars. You know, Sandra Dee was all over the local magazines with her mascara running down. The paparazzi were on them. She was breaking up with her husband. It was misery. I thought, oh, the poor woman. What if they did that to me in the school newspaper? You know, that's what empathy is. You know, you can identify,
Yes.
you know, with what you think is so big over there, with what is, you know, you can identify. So I had to write in blank verse on assignment, and I was getting my hair done for some beauty contest at the hair school by amateurs, and there were these stacks of these magazines with Sandra Dee crying on the cover, and so I wrote this poem called "The Fishbowl" about Hollywood before I ever was here. You know, the fishbowl is a world reverse, where fishermen with hooks that dangle from the bottom up reel down their catch without a fight on gilded bait. Pike, pickerel, bass, the common fish ogle through distorting glass. See only glitter, glamour, gaiety. Fog up the bowl with lusty breath. Lunge towards the bait and miss and weep for fortunes lost. Envy the goldfish? Why? His bubbles breaking round the rim while silly fishes faint for him and say, "Oh my God, I think he winked at me." So you see.
When did you write that?
When I was 16.
Wow.
So before I went to art school, before I got into this game, you know, so I'm not entering the game in a normal way.
Also, you see yourself as an outsider at that time as well, right? You see yourself as different from.
Oh yeah. Well, people
from-
tell me I'm
you're
from
not,
Mars all
not
the
mainstream.
time. No, I'm from Mars. How many times have I been told that?
But you also believe that to a certain extent.
What,
Not
that I'm
exactly-
from Mars?
Not
No, I
that you're
don't.
necessarily from Mars, but that
I'm sick all the time.
You've always felt like you're outside of the mainstream.
I am. I'm lying in hospitals trying not to die. I'm not a herd animal. Yeah, so I am outside. I'm born the day of the discoverer, the week of depth. So I'm cursed by astrology to be deeper than the average person and also have the need to be original, to plant the flag where no one else has been. So I'm going to listen to traditions which satisfy everybody and sell like hotcakes and go, that ain't shit. You know, it's been done and done and done.
So how does it feel like when that person becomes, as you did by the early 70s, this massive star? Having said all you did about fame.
I retreated into the BC wilderness.
Yeah.
You know, I hated it. Hated it. The fishbowl is a world reversed. Pike, pickerel, bass.
Meaning all of it? I mean, to the point where you look back at those times and go, that sucks.
That attention to celebrity is mental illness. You know, the mental illness that creates that attention is tragic to me.
What about the fact that just tons of people were buying your records?
Well, that's different. And that's different. And the people that feel the music, and the trick is, if you listen to that music and you see me, you're not getting anything out of it. If you listen to that music and you see yourself, it'll probably make you cry and you'll learn something about yourself, and now you're getting something out of it. You know? And those are the people, you know, that my communication is complete. Most of them, they know I'm famous, they know I'm this, but there's no real communication. It's just a phenomenon there, you know, and people will flick their bick at anything. You know what I mean? It's no big deal.
So when, I'm just thinking to this point of like you really having a difficult time with how popular you were becoming, how famous you were becoming.
No, wait, I'm not having let's just, when I realized how popular I was becoming, it was right before Blue, and I went, oh my God, a lot of people are listening to me. Well, then they better find out who they're worshiping. Let's see if they can take it. Let's get real. So I wrote Blue, which horrified a lot of people, you know, and then it created a lot of attention that was really weird. And so then I bought a property in British Columbia and dropped out, because what had happened is they're looking at me, and all I've done is reveal human traits. They haven't seen themselves in it. At the point that they see themselves in it, the communication is complete. At the point where they're looking after me, it's like pigs to blood, you know, it's like Marilyn Monroe on a tightrope or something.
Blue is
like
considered a classic. How so?
Now.
But at the time?
No.
People thought.
Horrified.
Well, how were they horrified? Why were they horrified?
Well, the men because it was a man's world. Chris Christopherson went, Joni, keep something of yourself. Johnny Cash said, the world is on your shoulders. They all recoiled because the game was, I'm bad, even though it was before that. The game is to make yourself larger than life. Don't reveal anything human. And my thing is, why? Movies do it. Okay, it hasn't been done in the song. Why do we have to, Bergman did it, in film. It's been done in film. So, but the trouble is, I'm the playwright, I'm the actress, and I want them to look at the play and see past it, but all of it, it's such an intimate art form, and I'm doing so much of it that all the attention is going to me, which is insane. From my point of view, it's like you're not going to get anything out of it if you look at me. You got to see yourself in it. Otherwise, it has no value.
It was enough to send you into the BC wilderness, but not enough to prevent you from continuing to make records. You're quite prolific at that time, right?
Oh, yeah. I went deeper, and it even got more unattractive. I went deeper, and it got sadder.
Well, it got bigger first. Court and Spark, and
Well, no, that's later. For the Roses went deeper. That was written while I was, on the land. And Court and Spark, by that time, the masses were, it was like the same thing that makes people stop at accidents. That's how they were viewing it. And I thought, oh, these people are sick, So to shake it off, I morphed again, and I got a band and came out Red Hot Mama kind of, and I had band players that
and wrote some killer songs.
Yeah, but they were fun, enough inner exploration of human nature. If that's what they're going to do, they're going to make it all on my shoulders. If that's the way they're going to view it, then you're not getting anything out. Eventually, a lot of people did. There was a good article written in the New Yorker last Christmas by a black woman who hated my music with a passion. Take that stuff off, take it off. And suddenly in Wales, she had an epiphany. She had people playing it in the car. She's saying, take it off, take it off. She gets out, she's wandering around this church, and suddenly she's singing a snatch, and she goes, now I'm singing it. So then she got into blue, and what happened was she couldn't be around people. Because she said it would make her feel naked. It would make her cry, and she couldn't. If she was going to listen to it, she couldn't have anybody around. And then she read where I had said, I felt kind of naked when I was writing it, which made her feel better. But it does, when you see yourself in it, impart a lot of self-knowledge, which keeps you being from quite so delusional. It's healthy. There's a lot of nutrition in this stuff. If you can get by your own stupid intellect. You know what I'm saying?
The other thing is, it takes a lot of courage and confidence to be calling these shots and morphing the way you were.
I nearly died a lot of times, and nobody was in my corner. I've never had anybody in my corner. So, as my mother and father would say, we didn't mollycoddle her. So I maybe it's the Irish blood, like
You've
that fighting Irish. I had to be, or I'd be dead. I'd be dead. Dengue fever. My doctor that I'm going to now, he's got 4 of us that had dengue fever. The other 3 are blind. I was never supposed to walk again. I'm a polio survivor. That took a lot of fight. And nobody believed that it was accomplishable. Then I lucked out later in my 40s when I began to deform again, post-polio syndrome, which Western medicine, which is so greedy and careless and evil, doesn't even recognize that exists. But I found a healer who regenerated the lost nerves in my back, a magician, a Chinese national treasure, who happened to be smuggled out of China by some Tonga from San Francisco, a great healer. And he, regenerated the lost nerves in my back. Boing, some muscles came up, the spine went straight, for very minimal charge. So I found a real genuine healer. So I've been lucky. I found 3, a kahuna, she's dead now. Western medicine has, Western medicine crippled children in their ignorance.
But if the creative confidence then came from that place, let me try this out, and you tell me if this. So many of the artists I get to speak to, and I can certainly relate to this. These are very successful, highly acclaimed kind of creative people. Are freaked out, are fearful, are nervous, have insecurities, are neurotic. There's a lot of fear in being an artist. Where did the fear happen in you?
You have a pocket of that in your process. Like in doing this ballet, there was not that long ago, I'm over that hump, and somebody said, Joan, you go through this every time. So there's, in the process...
What do you go through every time?
There's a part in the process where you just get lost and just don't think you can get the mixes, or you don't think you can get the sequence right, or, there's always a pocket where you bog down.
Thank God, that even happens to you.
And yeah, it's just part of the process, and you got to keep going. And there's a process in illnesses where you think you're going to die, and if you keep thinking that, you bloody well will. You just have to, no way I'm a cripple, no way I'm going to die,
So with those classic records of the 70s, there were moments where you thought, maybe this ain't so good?
I'm sure there were. And where there was maybe one line, oh, this isn't quite right, this is good, this is good, this is good, that's not clear enough, or that line is the weak line, and eventually
that's different. That's not the same as I don't know if I can do this, I don't know if I'm good enough, I don't know if people will appreciate what I'm putting out there. That's
okay, yeah,
right? That's what you're talking about, is honing something to be as good as you know it can
I
be.
don't care whether they appreciate it on a certain level, because I like the process. It's like, I don't care if nobody's seen these paintings, except people come in now with their cameras and they photograph them, boom, they're on the internet. There is no privacy anymore, so, but...
You like the process. Doesn't have to be, people don't have to hear or see it.
Yeah, it's exciting when you come, it's like advanced crossword puzzles or something, you come to the point where, oh, that's it.
But then somebody would challenge that. They would say, you didn't have to put out all these records, you didn't sign to Reprise, you didn't have to work with Kevin, you could have just been making music in your home.
Well, what else would I have done?
You would have enjoyed the process. You could have just played music by yourself.
Oh, but I was in the harness. I wouldn't have done it by myself. I wouldn't have written poetry in high school except it was on assignment. Something had to...
The push.
I had a contract to fulfill, so I had a duty, So then I kept signing up one after the other. And then they started complaining, Like I used to put out an album a year in the first part. But then the press got longer, the tours got longer, the illnesses increased. And they're going, well, you're not putting out as much as you used to, And you go, geez, I'm dancing as fast as I can, And I'm not going to tell them, well, I just spent a year in bed. It's none of your business. You know what I mean? So I lost a year there. But, and I was lucky or stupid or whatever, or courageous, combination of the, that I found a way to tap into most of the things that were happening to me. It made my hard changes interesting. Like this disease that I have is a nightmare. If you look at it subjectively, people all over the world kill themselves. They just can't take it. If you look at it objectively, it's fascinating.
Do you, in terms of the confidence piece, something that's really refreshing about you is reading at times. You tell me if they've got this right, but you own your talents. You're willing to accept having an ego and saying, I'm good at, I did well on this. This sounds good. I'm good at this. And on that
everyone has an ego.
Do you feel like...
You cannot say, I like this tomato soup without an ego. The ego is the original sin, Do
you feel like too many artists engage in false humility?
Yes. It's disgusting. I'd rather have real arrogance than false humility. That's, when somebody pays me the few compliments that I've really enjoyed, that I've been received, they humble me. They're heartwarming because a real connection has been made. We have met. I've put out a signal and this person has picked it up, right? and we're meeting like this. It's not like they got me on a pedestal or they're looking down on me because I'm not their favorite or whatever. We meet. And so that's a communication.
Why do you think there's this notion? Why do you think those artists engage in false humility? Why do you think?
Because it's fashionable and it's good. It's politics.
To be humble.
Yeah, it's it's baby kissing. It's politics. And it's also Christian training. And this is basically a Christian. Well, I guess it's not Christian. It's considered appropriate conduct, so therefore that conduct is emulated.
Right. And you prefer them to say, "I'm really good at this."
Who?
Yeah. I don't know. An artist that.
Well, it depends. If they're going around, no, because there's a thing about academics where they're encouraged to boast, and they can stand and run their credentials for 2 hours ad nauseum. I'm not advocating that, but I know what my standards are, and every time I met them, I raised them a little bit more. There are still things that I look up to, not as much as when I was young, but there are still things like, oh, thank God that I can still be amazed by, Debussy, Duke Ellington, not a lot, but there's still some things that I could learn from.
You're such a unique and individual artist. Who have you seen as your contemporaries?
Didn't have any. I mean, Leonard and Bob were the only peer group, you mean? I didn't really have a peer group. Maybe in the beginning, when I was first starting out, everything sounds good to you when you're young and all your friends, oh, geez, we're all making songs. But it was much more competitive, I felt, than it needed to be. There was a lot of short sheeting and, breaking your guitar and, especially for a girl, I'm too good for a girl, right? So there's a lot of resentment for that, Had a lot of things.
You mean you play too well?
Yeah, I'm too good on pinball. Makes guys mad. In pool, I can I can sandbag, but just to make the evening pleasant. But pinball, you got to keep the ball in the air. It's hard to sandbag, without throwing it. With pool, you can play a different. Those things for a woman, and they're all kind of zen. They're just eye on the ball. My dad was good at that. Eye on the ball. He was a good.
But so Leonard and Dylan are
We're
peer
writers.
group, but they're not, you don't consider them.
Not musically.
Not musical contemporaries.
No.
You can't, there's no one.
Duke, the people, that I look up to, Stravinsky, Duke Ellington, for daring and individuality, Debussy.
But they're not even the same era as you.
Well, no, that wasn't much in. Marvin Gaye, towards the end, when he got daring, and really he was fighting the odds too against, they were trying to hold him back because he was moving away from the hit department into the art department.
Let me ask you a bit about the Joni Mitchell image that is projected onto you.
Which one?
I guess there's a couple of. First of all, you've always had a distaste for being referred to as a confessional songwriter, right?
Yeah, that's
Why?
like a swinging light and billy clubs. You will confess. It's like, what did I confess to? I'm selfish. Mine is the most selfish generation, in history, right? What is so confessional? I'm sad? Oh, geez, have you never been sad? There's no, I guess my biggest secret was that I was an unwed mother, but when that came out, my God, there were so many of us over time. Even from my mother's generation, women came forward that got cut out, and it was kind of liberating when my daughter and I were reunited. It was a good news story for many people, that I wasn't run out of town on the rails or something for being a bad girl.
So back to, so if songwriting isn't confessional, then it's storytelling, and you are the actress or the director?
I'm all of those things. Many Had a Joan, like I'm the playwright, like Tennessee Williams, right? Then I have to perform the text, which takes sense memory, like a method actor, right? And sometimes I'm critical. Oh, why did I read that line like that? it's to this or to that. I'm critical of my performance as a purveyor of words. Why did, now I would read that word bon, like to get more,
Right.
I put the emphasis on the wrong syllable or whatever, like why didn't I catch that? Because I'm my own producer. So I'm using my own judgment when the performance is right. And a lot of them hold up over time, and some of them, that was the pinnacle of where, I grew after that.
But if you're method acting,
Well, all singers are. All singers are.
so you're saying that if someone writes a song, if Adele writes a song and she's singing it, and it's about a breakup she's had, she's acting?
Of course. She's not breaking up at that moment. It may be her own experience.
She's reliving the emotions.
She's reliving it. That's
Right.
method acting. You know?
But when you say an actress and director, then it suggests that it's something Orsat's. That's not you then. It's a role you're playing.
No. Method acting is being you. It's drawing on all your sense memory and everything. It's very real. But of course, it's art. And art is short for artificial. So the art of art is to be as real as you can within this artificial situation. That's what it's all about. Right? And that's what art is. And you can make it like Van Gogh's paintings are exaggerated to make the emotional experience of these landscapes realer for the deadened. It's not really that blue, the sky, and the stars aren't really that big. But you're not seeing them, so he's going to blow them up. So in a way, it's a lie to get you to see the truth.
Is it ever just entirely fiction? When you're writing? Or is it always method acting? Kate Bush says, I don't write about myself at all. I write about...
Well, I am Lakota, for instance. I'm not Lakota, but it's written with a lot of empathy. And I sing it with enough authenticity that the Lakota Sioux had me march as a dignitary with their chiefs. And their medicine men, all men. The women were kind of upset about it. A white woman marching, a blonde yet. Custer was a blonde. All their enemies were blondes. So, with enough authenticity to be invited to march with them as an equal and a dignitary. So, but there were people within the reservations that we marched with that looked at me with suspicion as an outsider, no matter how authentic. I am not Lakota, but I was able to state their case as articulately.
It always comes from inside you.
Right. So it's real, but it's art.
But it's not confessional. I'm getting the lexicon together here. I'm making sure.
Well, confession in this culture is usually, it's either in church and it's a sin, or it's being whipped out of you in the police station. Right. I just find, or it's the confessions of the first person to write in first person in any language, I believe, was St. Augustine, who wrote volumes of I to his God, right? That was the first person to write that personally, I think, in literature anywhere, and it was called the Confessions of St. Augustine, so that comes in, But they lump me in with Plath and Sexton, who frankly, to me, Plath is morbid and Sexton is a liar. She's not really telling the truth most of the time. She lied to her psychiatrist. I don't like being on that list with those women. I don't think they're as honest as I am.
Well, let me ask you about something else you get lumped in with. There continues to be the pervading image of Joni Mitchell, the winsome blonde with the guitar, the hippie folk goddess. How do you feel about that? Your sometime alter ego?
A hippie folk goddess. Well, we need goddesses, but I don't want to be one. Hippie. The only hippie thing that I like the fashion show and I like the Rainbow Coalition, but most of the hippie values were silly to me, and free love, come on, it's a ruse for guys, it's just, there's no such thing. And if you, like I did, okay, I say, let's see, look at the rep I got, there was a list of people whose path I crossed. It wasn't even, in the summer of love, they made me into this love bandit, right? In the summer of love, so much for free love. Nobody knows more than me what a ruse that was. So, that was a thing for guys. It was a ruse for guys, coming out of prohibition. It's hard to get laid before that, right? So, hippie goddess, like, again, if you elevate me, you're not going to meet yourself in my songs, well, maybe you can do, I don't know, I don't think so.
You basically don't like being pigeonholed, Joni
Exactly.
Mitchell,
No,
right?
I'm fluid, and yeah, everything I am, I'm not, kind of. And that's the way it is with all people if they really observe themselves.
And you've referenced a few times in this interview talking about how the interviews you've done, things have been misunderstood, things have been taken that you've said and changed. I mean, do you feel generally misunderstood? Do you feel like
I don't go around feeling misunderstood, but
do you feel like others misunderstand?
Oh, constantly. But I don't go around feeling misunderstood.
What does that mean, you don't go
Well,
around?
I don't hold on to it. I go out, I'm misunderstood. I see a butterfly, I go for a swim. I go out, I'm misunderstood. I take a drive in my car. Somebody comes over, I'm misunderstood. But I don't,
You've learned to shake it off.
Well, usually we've been working to try and get, I'm trying to get clear. Like Wayne Shorter, okay? People say, oh, nobody can understand what Wayne's saying. And then his wife and people say, you can understand what Wayne's saying.
Yeah.
I said, well, I think so. But he'll do to me what I do. He'll say something and I'll paraphrase and he'll go, no, because in my paraphrasing, I have misdirected the target
Right.
ever so slightly.
Yeah.
I almost get what he's saying,
I
but
love
not
it.
quite.
I love that we've been doing that here. I mean, if the theme is you're constantly misunderstood, what is the greatest misconception about Joni Mitchell?
Well, okay, I'll give you a greatest misconception. Oh, there's so many. If I made a list of the things I've been likened to and gave it to you, and you didn't know who it was about, you're just like the singing nun. You're just like Marilyn Monroe. You're just like Mick Jagger. Joni, you're like Mick Jagger, Richard Nixon, and Gomer Pyle rolled into one. You look like Greta Garbo. You look like an embryo. You look like, if you saw...
An embryo?
Well, if I went into this long description, you look like a puppet. You look like of all these things, both yin and yang, and male and female, and the list is, and say, okay, this person was described this way. Who is this person? You never know, and you're going, God, it's just, whatever it is that's triggering the you're just like, is in the individual's head, whatever it is that they're seeing. And Maureen Beatty said fame is a series of misunderstandings surrounding a name. I don't know whether that was his thought or he's quoting somebody on that, but it stands as...
I'd run with the Garbo. Yes, I'm just like Greta Garbo.
I met the guy that hollered out, I put it on a record, Joni, you're just like Richard Nixon, Gomer Pyle and Mick Jagger rolled into one. Years later, I met him at Studio 54, and he came up and he said, I'm the guy that said that. I said, oh, I always wanted to ask you, are you just like Mick Jagger, Gomer Pyle, and Richard Nixon rolled into one? He said, yes. I said, I thought so. Because people tend to project, their trip onto you, especially if they don't have self-knowledge, and most of them don't, so you really, to be famous, you really have to know who you are, because you're getting this barrage of, mislabeling and, stuff coming at you.
Can I ask you about your relationship to some of your songs, especially the big songs that people think of back to the 70s and the 80s and Joni Mitchell and the late 60s for that matter. And when I interviewed Leonard Cohen a couple of years ago, we talked about how he's almost grown into his songs. That the songs that he wrote when he was 30 years old are more appropriate for him now than when he actually wrote them. It's quite remarkable. In your case, it almost feels like the inverse. You said, I feel miscast now in my early songs.
Well, not
They're
both sides
ingenue.
now. Both sides now I grew into.
But you redid both sides now.
Right.
And
It's
was that
not
why?
Well, it's not an ingenue. It's not a good ingenue role. I saw Mabel Mercer do it in her 70s, and I thought it was a wonderful performance. And I went back to tell her. I said, you know, I've heard that song performed by a lot of people. I didn't tell her I was the author. You know, I said, but it takes somebody your age to pull it off. And she went, huh? And I went, oh, you don't even tell a 70-year-old, which I am now, you know, that she's old. You know, she was offended, and I just kind of slunk out and didn't say anything more. But that song, I've looked at life from both sides now. You know, 21 when I wrote it, I took a lot of ridiculing for it. Dave Van Ronk, who was young but was like Burl Ives, he was a young, old-seeming guy, you know, or Gabby Hayes, you know, he could kind of bring, I was just miscast in it, I think, as a young girl. That I really like the performance I did in my 50s of it. And my young one, you know, it's too young a girl to pull off that role.
When you did it in 2000, the new version of Both Sides Now, and you sang it an octave down, was that because it's more comfortable to sing it an octave down, or was that to really send the message of the pathos or the feelings involved in that song resonate at a lower verse?
No, it's just that 30 years into my career, my mother told me that she was an alto, that my grandmother was an alto, I was probably an alto, so I've been singing pseudo-soprano, but this disease has eaten my sinuses. About 75, I started going, oh, feels like I've got bubble gum in my horn. You know, like everything, you know, so, and I have vocal nodes from singing rock and roll. So, no, you know, I used a lot of alto on my first record, you know, and then I used a lot of like real high, from singing along with CSN, like I would sing up there with Graham, like in the razor throat thing,
right.
in the high end. No, at this point I don't have a soprano voice at all. You know, I used to have 3 octaves, so I didn't know what I was. I just had 3 octaves, I could sing any note I could think. Now I'm just an alto. So I had no choice.
Beyond Both Sides Now, do you still relate to those songs? The songs we'd find on the early records?
Some of them, yeah. I mean, you know, in putting together this ballet, one concept which I abandoned was to do songs of innocence, songs of experience, kind of a Blake thing, you know, in the 2 acts, because it's got an intermission, and to use a lot of the early love songs, and use the younger dancers, you know, like for that. But I opted for a more dramatic thing, and I'm kind of mixing styles together. But I don't go back and listen to them, but the first album is semi-classical. It's almost like Schubert, you know. It isn't folk music. It was kind of mislabeled from the beginning. Folk singers went out, bought it, put it on their turntable and went, what? You know, and the open tunings at that time to give it, it's more like indicated classical arrangements on the guitar. Like it's kind of classical guitar more than folk style guitar. It's not, there's some strummy stuff, you know. And I got a little more strummy for the next 3 records because I was hanging out with strummers, Neil and David and Graham, you know, and I got kind of caught up in that, you know.
And then you do the full band thing by Court and Spark, and
Right.
then you start to move into this amazing transformation of genres into the jazz. And I wanted to just ask you about the Mingus record, because a record I'm quite fond of. But,
thank you.
But a record that you really put yourself out there on in terms of doing what wasn't expected of you. It didn't sell as well.
No.
It got a bit of a critical drubbing.
Yeah, except in Europe where it was more understood, like jazz is.
Tell me about the decision to not take the easy route and make a record like Mingus.
Well, I was warned when Charles approached me. That was Charles's project, not mine. He was approaching me with a very different project. When he found out he was going to die, he told his friend Daniele Sanatori, come over, I want to talk to you about God. And Daniele, who's an Italian film producer, said, oh, you're talking to the wrong person. But he went out and he bought him, what's his name, the quartet, Through the Halls the Women Go, speaking of Michelangelo. Oh, what's that poet's name? Anyway, he read it and he couldn't get anything out of it. So his wife, Sue, who was kind of a literati, she had a magazine that was somewhat literate, I think, in New York, paraphrased it to him. He still didn't get it. So, you know, he was trying to approach to my office, and my office didn't want me to go towards jazz because it was less lucrative. They were still trying to get me to write hits.
Your office being your label?
My office being my managerial company.
Okay.
You know, and they'd warned me. They didn't even tell me who's approaching me, you know, but it came through the grapevine. It went from Sue to a fashion designer who was a friend of an actor, to the actor, to me, that Mingus wanted to make contact. So, you know, through the grapevine. So I made contact, and he had this idea to have an Oxford English voice reading from, oh, I almost had the name. I keep thinking E.J. Pratt or E.E. Cummings, but it's not. Anyway, reading the text. And then he said, in the style of the Baptist church, where you have tag team preaching, one preacher preaching the thee, thou text, and the other one saying, the little cat with the bent frame, you know, translating it into the vernacular. So I said, well, gee, if you want to do that, you know, why don't you get John Hendricks? Because he's a master of that. Right. He's the great bebop lyricist, you know. Well, no, he wanted me, and he wanted me to play acoustic guitar. So he liked my acoustic playing. Anyway, I got the book, I read it, and I called him back and said, you know, I could paraphrase the Bible, I could do it with the Bible, but I can't do it with this because, frankly, I don't think there's a lot of meat on it. You know, I mean, it's poetry, it's kind of diaphanous, you know. They muddy their waters that they might appear deep. You know, it's like as Nietzsche would say, you know. So then he wrote 6 melodies, and he flattered me. You know, he called me up, and he was kind of wry, and he went, I wrote these melodies, you know, and I call them Joni 1, Joni 2, Joni, all the way up to 6, you know. So I thought, well, you know, he's a character, I'll go out and visit him. So I took a flight out, and we kind of hit it off, and we started this project for his album. And he put me in contact with bands, a lot of great players, Chick Corea and Mahavishnu, you know, people, and Stanley Clarke, and a lot of great players. But to me, it was kind of like Bradley's. I can't explain it. It was still retro. It was, you know, and I wasn't confident in myself as a jazz singer. I didn't think, you know, I thought my voice was too clear. You know, when I'd hear it back, it seemed very fledgling, especially against these tracks. But I had my dream band in mind, so I tried all these different takes, which I should put out at some point, because I think I sang better, they were steadier, but I had a concept in mind which was pretty risky. And the players that I got were Wayne and Herbie and Jocko, who are all very innovative players, and Peter Erskine, who was, you know, a drummer I'd never worked with before. And I ran it by them, so, you know, they did as I instructed, which was an unusual approach at that time, but it would weave me in as a musician because they tended to look at the chirp, they called them, you know, the girl singer is a necessary decorative evil. You know, they weren't considered a musician per se, you know, and I wanted to be woven into it like a textile.
Were you disheartened by the reaction
Who?
To that record, Mingus?
No, things conspired. They warned me at my management company, if you do this, you'll be excommunicated from the airwaves, which I was.
The jazzers didn't think you were, thought you were a rocker. The rockers thought you were a jazzer. The
jazzers thought I was taking advantage, not the greats. You know, it's never the greats, because they're risk takers. But the near greats gossip. And they're usually riddled with envy anyway. They're, you know, so there was some complaint among what I would call the less talented, you know, that I was taking advantage of Mingus when I'm Mingus's scribe. I mean, he sent for me. So, but he didn't like that band. That was Miles's band, and he was very competitive with Miles. And he didn't like electronic music. And I thought, oh, here we go again. I went through this in the folk clubs. Pete Seeger cried when Bob Dylan plugged in. You know, all these schools have their perimeters. And they have their uniforms, and they have their laws. It's like...
And there you are traveling through it.
Are you a Catholic, or are you a Baptist, or what are you? You know, like, stick to one thing, you know. and I can't. I like
You're
a
an
little-
original.
I'm an original.
What did you say earlier? I was cursed with the proclivity for originality or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm born the day of the discoverer. I mean, when I found that out, it explained things to me why I'm kind of contemptuous. And Mingus was too. Mingus has got a song called "If Charlie Parker Was a Gunslinger, There'd Be a Lot of Dead Copycats."
Well, this is the thing. This
Mingus
whole
and
thing
I
about
clicked.
copycats. Is it realistic, Joni, for a contemporary music artist to not be a copycat of some sort?
Yes, I'm not a copycat. What am I? I'm pretty original. And I
What about a
can't-
new artist today? I mean, it just.
I left
Isn't
a lot
everyone
of half-baked ideas in my work for people to come and finish.
Where's the line? Where's the line between paying?
I just haven't. I'm not saying be like me, please. I'm
Okay.
not trying to start a school. People that have tried to start into my school, I went, woe be to the imitators. Like if you're going to pile up those many words, Paul Simon tried it, and I went, yikes, and I stopped
Right,
doing
right.
it. Like I go, this should not be a school. This is just painter's principles that I'm trying to apply. Don't take that direction. I'm not sure I succeeded with it. It's kind of sounds goofy when I hear it
But
coming
where's
back.
where's the line between learning lessons from our predecessors, our musical heroes, and being a copycat?
Well, tradition is a copycat, and most people love tradition. I'm not saying, like that's what sells. So please, what I need, I'm not proselytizing what I need. I need, because of my birthday, to discover. Not everybody has that birthday or that need, and most people are perfectly content. And 99.9% of the musicians sat in their room, picked a hero, and emulated it and tried to cop that sound or that this or that. That's not my approach.
Right.
I approached it like a painter with a painter's need to be an original. And that's not a normal need in music, nor am I saying be like me. I'm not. It means you end up, I'm a mutt, I belong to nothing. There's a great liberty in that, and I'm a freedom freak. But there are times when you wish, when you have no one on your side.
But when you
don't
talk
belong
about
to
someone like
anything.
in 2010 about Dylan, when you have Bob Dylan, you say he's not authentic at all. He's a plagiarist. His name and voice.
Oh, wait, I didn't say that. I didn't say
No.
that he's not authentic at all. That is not a word I use. No,
That was from the LA Times.
Yes, okay, that's journalistic bullshit, And, he told me I haven't written a song in years. I said, well, what are you talking about? Who's writing them then? He said the box. He just jots down. He came down to craft. Inspiration doesn't stay with a lot of artists very long. It's very brief, and then you're in the game, and you got to keep it sustaining it with something, right? You notice it, like One Trick Wonders, 2 good albums and then they peter out. To sustain a gift for a long time is very rare.
Does that make you disappointed in him?
In Dylan?
Yeah.
No, and that remark is completely out of context. The interviewer was an I went into that thing about the actor, the thing that we've been through here, and he accused me of being unauthentic. Now that's just ignorance. So I'm talking to a guy, how do I explain to this moron whose IQ is somewhere between his shoe size and his knees, and he's misconstruing everything I say. I'm doing this for John Kelly, who's impersonating me. I hate doing interviews with stupid people. This guy's a moron, and I said, and then I got philosophical. Philosophical? I said, yes, philosophical, I said, you do know what philosophy is, don't you? So everything I said, he's calling into question. I can't talk to an adult like that without getting aggravated. They call us exploding morgies. Our nerves are all wrapped around by fibrous things and everything. Our nerves are worn thin. We do not want to talk to stupid people, anyone with this disease.
How am I doing?
We're doing fine.
Okay.
But I do get intense though sometimes. But that's the problem.
Let's get off the Dylan. I will ask him he is of your there's a generation there, and you talked about Leonard and Bob before.
I like a lot of Bob's songs. Musically, he's not very gifted. He's borrowed his voice from old hillbillies. He's got a lot of borrowed things. He's not a great guitar player. He's invented a character to deliver his songs sometimes I wish that I could have that character, because, you can do things with that character, it's a mask of sorts, so.
Let me ask you about the common generation, because you wrote Woodstock in '69, a
Right.
song that defined a generation. A lot of people
So they
assumed,
say.
well,
So they say.
yes, they do say that, and it sort of has, and a lot of people assumed you were there, and you weren't. And how did you, in David Crosby's words, capture that moment better than anybody who's actually there?
Because I was one of the many that were thwarted, so that was the place every kid wanted to be. And I got to the airport with CSN and our agent, David Geffen, and our manager, Elliot, on a Sunday night when I was supposed to play, and it was a catastrophe. I had to do the Dick Cavett show the following day, and it was Geffen that decided, oh, we can't get Joni in and we can't get her out in time. So he took me back to the pier where he had a suite, where he lived, and we watched it on TV. And I was the deprived kid that couldn't go. So I wrote it from the point of view of a kid going there. If I'd been there in the back room with all the cutthroat, like egomaniacal crap that goes on backstage, I would not have had that perspective. It's a good thing I didn't go, because I wouldn't have been able to write it from the point of view of a person in attendance.
And if that
I
song-
wrote it for a person in attendance and why they wanted to go, because I wasn't allowed by circumstance to attend.
If that song did
So it was
capture
written with empathy.
the spirit, it beautifully explained. If that did capture the spirit of the generation, you've also been outspoken you've been a critic of that generation.
Yes.
Tell me about your views on the failure of the baby boomers.
Okay. We were raised on Disney. Someday My Prince Will Come. A lot of fairy dreaming. We came up in affluence, unprecedented. Not that we were greatly wealthy, but we all had houses, even though they were mortgaged. Our mothers had bought into the white picket fence, like a cottage, little modest houses, not like big McMansions like they have big yuppie appetites now, but just a little cottage with some nice garden and, and baby makes 3 or whatever. And they got caught up in competitive, keeping up with the Joneses. The cars took the husbands away. They had a life separate from the housekeeper. When they came home, they were tired. They didn't want to hear about the housewife's problems. And the housewife was always shown smiling and holding up a detergent. It was all about keeping a clean house, and my sheets are cleaner than yours, and my husband's got a newer car than yours, therefore, I'm the most important person on the block. And all that pettiness, and it trickled down into the play of the children. It was culturally rebel without, then out of it came the first seeds, rebel without a cause, and Marlon Brando, like, what are you rebelling against? What have you got? The sickness of the collapse of that dream was vague, but the wives were unhappy. The home contained these, for the most part, these unhappy women.
And it's led to an unhealthy world.
So,
would
when
argue.
the women are not singing in the kitchen, you've got a sick nation. So whatever it was, the breakdown of that dream, then out of it came, this liberated, spoiled, selfish generation into the costume ball of it, free love, free sex, free music, free. We're so free, and Woodstock was the culmination of it. At that point, our numbers were big enough to constitute a voting bloc. So suddenly, instead of being a minority, we were a viable political community, And then the straights began to grow their hair long and wear the love beads, and I'm going to get a Nero's, I'm going to get a Nero suit for my husband, Martha, and my generation, for the most of the 70s, fell into a state of apathy, sucked their thumb. Heavy drugs followed light drugs. The thing got darker and darker, and they didn't know where to take it. And when the 80s came along and the Reagans got into power, it went hippie, yippee, yuppie. And there was all of the shootings and the beatings and the Democratic Convention with hippies coming this way and cops coming the other and their heads getting bashed in. seeing that America was an ugly, violent place at the governmental and the social structure of it, the pigs and all of that stuff, the violence against this subculture, which was really,
All right. I got it.
and they just didn't have another plan. So then they were converted into consumers. Portfolio, play the Wall Street thing, consume. They went right into the thing that their parents had on a bigger scale, and a greedier scale. Make more money. Dallas, crooked rich people are good. The Regans are good. Madonna, I'm a material girl, is good. All of the role models were to the shallow and the acquisitive. And we were converted, from some kind of naive idealist. I was not a part of that. I was not a part of the anti-war movement either. I played in Fort Bragg. I went the Bob Hope route, because I had uncles that died in the war. And I thought it was a shame to blame the boys that were drafted.
You were part of the.
I played in Fort Bragg.
Very long,
and I didn't
a long time
protest.
before others. You were aware of environmental destruction, though. You write Big Yellow Taxi
That
before.
was my issue. Nobody was interested in it.
Yeah.
Then they were all hung up on the war and blaming the soldiers. It was dumb. Even Dylan's writing was dumb. I just want you to know I'll spit on your grave. But all the people, they rally around these things, which, in terms of revolution, just make the people in power snicker.
Turbulent Indigo is not about the songs on that record. I mean, run the gamut from like Sex Kills to there's environmentalism. There is a look at the war. So you then become you're seeing the world in a more political way than
I'm
we're used to.
politically awakened by the personal. I beat City Hall, by the way, in 2 courts. I had a corrupt lawyer. They're all corrupt. They're just fleecing the insurance company. But I lost in the first court, went to the second, and won. And my own lawyer said the judge was stupid. I said, "What do you mean he's stupid?" He said he was a Latino, and he looked at it and he said, "I don't see a case here." I said, "You call that stupid? That's common sense. It's very rare. It's like Alice and the Red Queen. That's an intelligent man. You, on the other hand, are not an intelligent lawyer. Thank God we won." We had a good judge,
Joni, when you were talking about the way you created the conditions where you could call the shots to a certain extent around your own creativity. Not just to a certain extent. I mean, to a large extent. You were producing your own records.
There was no producer. You got to get this clear. What I realized, David Crosby, quote unquote, produced my first record. Well, how you could screw up a voice and guitar like that, and all he did was hold chord. It's just awful, that record sonically. It's a shame. It needs to be redone. But of course, there's no money for it. But the point is, after that, shouldn't we get a real piano player, man? Wait, I haven't played the piano since I was 8, but I got this idea. So let me get it up to speed. So by the time you explained what you want, anyway, after that, I went into the second album. They sent in a hotshot producer, Rothschild, that was doing the Doors. What he put me through on that one, which is the old producer thing, constant coitus interruptus. I'm singing with my eyes closed, and he bursts in like God and goes, "No." So you're being hammered with negativity. You've swayed off your mic, or you've done this or everything. And when he was finished, he looked at his watch and said, "Well, I have to go and do the Doors. I'll be back in 2 weeks." He left. I said to the engineer, "Henry, it was my first encounter. Do you think we could get this record finished in 2 weeks before he gets back? Because if this, he'll make me hate music. After this one day, I hate music. He's making me hate music. My love of it was killed at 8 by a woman that hit me with a ruler for composing, and it went underground for 10 years. It's a delicate thing. So we had the record done. Wasn't that good because, but we did 13 records together, Henry and I.
But I guess my
with
question...
no producer.
Okay, so, but in terms of really maintaining a sense of your creativity, you did the artwork. You're very powerfully determining what the music is going to be on the records. Nobody's parachuted in to write the stuff for you or tell you what to
Painting it
do.
on. Nobody stands over you when you're painting.
Do you feel
tells
like,
you where to put your brush?
well, do you feel then, and especially doing this all as a woman too, and what you just talked about in terms of the terms of your contract that then Neil and others followed in your footsteps, do you accept that you were a pioneer?
Oh yeah, sure. Oh, I blazed a lot of trails. Self-publishing, a lot.
And a lot of that as a woman, but you don't like to be called a feminist, correct?
No, I'm not a feminist.
And where's that line for you?
I don't want to get a posse against men. I'd rather go toe-to-toe myself. Work it out.
Before I let you go,
Yeah.
and finally be rid of me, let me ask you a bit about where you are now, where you're at now. You have a milestone birthday this year, turning 70. How do you feel about aging?
Oh, I'm fine with it as long as I can be healthy. I don't mind the aging. It's hard to tell at this age what is age decline and what is the disease. You know, I'm always asking my doctor, you know, do old people do this? Is that the disease or is that, you know, in other words, can I fight it or do I have to accept it? What can I fight and what can I accept? So that's my battle at this time is, you know, just trying to enter into old age, which is a decline of certain things, but also there's a liberty to it, which I feel it is kind of like second childhood, only not that you're childish necessarily. It's just that I saw a monarch butterfly go by the other day. Well, I'm always kind of thrilled by little things like that anyway. I've never lost that wonder and delight at things like that.
Are you someone who's preoccupied by mortality?
By immortality?
By mortality.
Oh God, no. I mean, I've faced death so many times. No. No,
Doesn't freak you
Salvador
out.
Dali was. You know, that's what he was doing, all that commercial stuff to be hibernated. No. No, I'm very good with death. I mean, all my animals have died, some of them in my arms. Birds have died in my, you know, started with birds. I was introduced to death. A bird came to me to die that was mauled by a cat, and then another bird that hit the spray came
What
to me
about
to
your
die.
own mortality? When you say you face
I don't
this
want to
every
die
day,
yet.
are you freaked out by it?
No. You know, I just don't, I want more time. It's as simple as that. So, you know, I don't want to go yet. I've got a lot of things still that I want to accomplish and you know, and savor, you know. No, not at all.
Well, there's a lot of things that we want you to accomplish because I know you're, and you've got lots of time to do it. I know you're working on a memoir. You're working on a book of poetry.
No.
No, there isn't some poetry you're working
There's
on.
a book that came out of my songs, just came out, called Gathered Light, where, you know, again, you know, I've been kicked out of every school of music that there is, you know, and also I've been kind of withheld as a poet because I sang it, right? So, whereas Leonard is considered a poet, you know, and Dylan is considered, and even Jim Morrison, God knows why, is considered a poet, but
Because he called himself a poet.
maybe, but they go, well, she thinks she's a poet, or she was the most poetic among them, or something. So there's always this perverse withholding of this thing. So a book came out that promised to it's all full of poets. It promised inclusion. Some of them are nice, but for the most part, I realize I never liked poetry. So whatever it is that I do, to me, poetry. Nietzsche on the poets was very accurate, you know. Did you ever read Zarathustra, Zarathustra?
No.
The poet, well, here's a kind of in a nutshell. The poet is the vainest of the vain. Even before the ugliest of water buffalo doth he fan his tail. I've looked among them for an honest man, and all I've dredged up are old God's heads, old God's heads. Here's a good one. He muddies his waters that he might appear deep. Well, so the academic poets in this book, they're digging under my lines, like looking for hidden meaning and slapping themselves on the back going, I think I'm onto something here. So poetry is obviously mistaught at the level of higher education. It was mistaught in the school system, you know, and I don't, to me it was like eating sunflower seeds with your fingertips, you know, for all that effort to crack this thing, you get this piddly little nugget, you know, like, I mean, and Nietzsche felt like that about it, you know, and even Shakespeare, who I love, like soliloquies and stuff, they're rich, you know, regardless of whether he stole it or where he collected, he rounded up great thought and did it in a very artful way, you know. But his sonnets, I can smell the money in them. Like he's got, I don't know how many sonnets about, you're so beautiful that you should reproduce yourself and I'm the guy to do it. You know, and I think, okay, he wrote one. Some guy said, I'm hustling this girl. Would you write me one like you wrote for John?
Even Shakespeare's a copycat.
Yeah, I mean, oh, you did that for money, Willie, and you did that for money, you know.
What about performance? Let's come full circle to where we started with this interview. This Luminato Festival. Are you going to get on stage?
I guess I'm going to do something kind of. I can't sing. There's no point. There's no. My singing is probably permanently gone.
Really?
You know. Well, it would just. Yeah, you have to know when to quit. You know, I mean, I had an instrument that I can control, and I don't have an instrument that I can control now. You know, basically because of the illness. And even though I'm getting better, and it's getting a little better, it's still very impaired. In the planes, in the sinuses, like you have all these planes that you bounce notes off. Well, if I'm bouncing, you know, it could ricochet. I can't control it like I used to, and I used to have very good intonation. So, you know.
So you're going to do a poem?
So I can still talk. So I have a poem which I haven't been able to set to music because I can't sing. So I'm going to try talking it down. Doing something, but I'm going to do it with Brian. I'm going to try it with Brian and this trumpet player that I like. So I don't know what it's going to evolve into. Maybe I'll sing a couple of notes. Because it's frustrating. With the singing, I could put the correct emphasis on certain words by hitting the notes. I could put emphasis that I can't with speaking it. It's lacking to me something just to speak it that I miss. But you know, Jorn seemed to think, and Rufus, that it communicated, so they've encouraged me to do this thing.
I think that'll be really exciting for a lot of people. This has been such a pleasure. Before we end this, I have to ask you, we've talked so much about all of what you've done throughout your career, or a lot of what you've done throughout your career, your tremendous creativity, the tremendous success you've had as defined by yourself and as defined by others, your fans, critics, etc. What are you most proud of, Joni? What do you look back and go, that is what I'm really proud of?
Well, there isn't anything singular, you know. There's healthy pride and unhealthy pride. I try not to indulge too much in pride, but you know, there are cases, man, in the street where people come up that it's really meant a lot to them. Like, for instance, what first comes to mind here is 2 young girls who lost their mother in their early teens, who holed up in their bedroom with this music, and it was cathartic and I kind of surrogate mothered them, you know. And there are people like, where did I read, the woman that plays in The Sopranos,
Edie Falco.
The bosses, she said that I raised her. So there are these strange things out there. Well, there is experiential exchange in the work, you know, that to a young person I think is valuable. There's one thing that I've been trying to bring across to people, I think, is you're on your own, let's face it. You know, like, and that's okay. You know, and that's kind of Nietzsche, that's what Nietzsche's Überman was all about. It's kind of a different approach to a similar idea, you know, to remove the crutches.
It's a little scary.
It is for most people. You know, for me, it just kind of happened. I didn't have, you know, I didn't have anybody guiding me. They just removed themselves because I've had a very interesting and a very challenging life, you know. like I say, like a lot of battles, just disease after disease after. I mean, I shouldn't be here, you know, but I have a tremendous will to live, and a tremendous joie de vivre, you know, alternating, you know, with irritability. Yeah.
Joni Mitchell, thank you. Thank you for inviting us into your home.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you for taking the time. It's been an absolute joy.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank
Nice
you,
to
Jan.
meet you.
Thank you.
Was that okay, you think?
That's amazing. Come on, that was great.
Okay, good. That's good.